What's up, Ego Hackers? Welcome to Season 32, Episode 1. Premium lectures for the Journeyman members. This is what is the octagram according to the 16 types. And we're going to be discussing the 4 octagram variants for each of the 16 types and how they behave and how their octagram comes to form and how it comes to be. And this is basically the first time with which we as the Ego Hacker community will be discussing a concept known as subtypes. But for the sake of the octagram, we're going to be calling them variants and not necessarily subtypes, because I get that everyone enjoys the concept of subtypes from the perspective of objective personality system, or OPS. But when we say subtypes, usually people think about objective personality systems. So we're not really going to be discussing it and labeling it subtypes. We're mostly going to be discussing it variants. And this is what is the octagram for the ESTJ episode, because naturally we go about the direction of the type grid. We follow the type grid basically with each of the 16 types and then go from there to other places, etc. So it's pretty awesome to have this opportunity to talk about octagram. Most people are very confused about octagram and where it comes from. What is it even for? Is it even useful? And it's so funny when we get people like Tony, the INFJ on the Discord server, who I haven't seen him in a long time. He probably left. Regardless, I haven't seen him posting very much, which some people would say that that's a good thing. I'm not entirely sure that is the case. But the difference is that even he's started complaining about how, well, they haven't presented enough data to me, as if we're supposed to put everything on a silver platter and give it to him. And it's no, we are waiting. And you know what? Like the rest of us, you're just going to have to wait. So let's exercise a little bit more patience here before, we get all butthurt about it. It's not my fault. We have to do things properly. And we haven't been able to present very much octagram content because we're waiting to do this 16 episode series. So yeah, for the next 8 months, we're going to be discussing the octograms and the octagram variants of each of the 16 types. And the ESTJ is the first one up, and then we'll be doing ESTP as well for this month, which is January 2023. So yeah. But what is the octagram? The octagram basically is a way for us to map out human nurture when it comes to the 16 types, right? Now, traditionally, people use the Enneagram instead of the octagram because it's kind of new, let's be honest. But the Enneagram, they would use the Enneagram from a Jungian analytical psychology perspective in a way to help explain human nurture. And that honestly presents a problem. And it presents a problem because the Enneagram is inherently flawed. It actually tries to also explain a person's nature, because the Enneagram was developed without the MBTI in mind. It was developed without 16 type personality in mind. So when people are using the Enneagram, they're like, oh, I'm like a 5W6 or whatever the hell they say. From that point of view, they're combining that with their 16 personalities MBTI type in an effort to say, okay, this is like the subvariant that I am of this particular archetype. And the thing is that that's not legitimate. That's not real. So what we had to do is we had to pull out the nature component out of the Enneagram, and that's where we got the octagram, basically. So we have the octagram, and we're going to be discussing the octagram at length within the context of these lectures, right? So speaking of which, octagram is the interpretation of how nurture impacts our nature. There are 4 paths of nurtural development. And that basically is whether or not you're unconscious developed versus unconscious focused, or whether or not, or subconscious developed, and then whether or not you're unconscious focused versus subconscious focused as well. So basically, it's a classification between cognitive development versus cognitive focus. Cognitive development represents where a person has been in their life, and cognitive focus is where they are taking their life next, basically. It's like, what's next? Where have I been versus where am I going next? It's like, what's my introverted sensing from a nurtural perspective, and what is my introverted intuition from a nurtural perspective? And that ultimately represents the 4 expressions of octagram, and then putting them together into the 4 variants when you're combining cognitive development with cognitive focus. And what this does is it gives you each of the 16 types end up having 4 different flavors, right? And then that flavors gets a little bit different when you multiply that by 2 different genders, right? And each variant can be different when actually looking at a gender perspective, right? Because females prioritize self above tribe, and males prioritize tribe above self, right? And because of that, the priorities end up becoming different from an octagram expression of the 16 types. And hopefully we'll be examining that within the context of this lecture, right? So anyway, the Enneagram tries to combine nurture with a bit of nature, as we discussed. The octagram is a pure nurture separated from nature, but demonstrating how nurture shapes the expression of our nature. The octagram reveals the 4 nuanced expressions for each type. Octagram is also the version of subtypes, such as like what we talked about with objective personality system, and details why each subtype or variant expresses themselves differently. Now, the thing is, though, is that like you have to really understand that octagram oftentimes is shaped by external forces, right? So that could be environmental, that could be people in your life, which is technically still environmental. That could also be like your spiritual belief system. That could be a thing as well. And it just ends up becoming, you know, a big impact on a person's soul upon their nature, such that their nature ends up behaving in a certain way, which ends up becoming their nurture. And then as a result of their nurture, they end up nurturing others because they end up having impact on other people. The process of impacting other people's souls or other people's personalities is basically called nurturing them. And then as a result of nurturing them, you're developing their nurtures. You are impacting their nurtures. You are shaping their nurture. You are shaping their octagram. That's basically how that works, folks. Okay, so that's an octagram perspective. So environment it matters. And then also this other concept known as soft locking. So soft locking ultimately is the key or the engine behind nurtural development in people, because the majority of the nurtural development someone goes through, the nurtural impact someone goes through that shapes their octagram, is actually as a result of people in their life, especially people in their childhood, especially their nuclear family. So our environment forces us to prefer one side of the mind over the other. That's basically the basic premise behind the octagram. It is ultimately, from a 4 sides dynamics perspective, it really just is a preference of whichever side of the mind you're dealing with. And then our family, friends, community, and the social situations we face pressure our brains through neuroplasticity to adapt to our environment. Now, oftentimes, I find it so funny, like, people within the ego hacker community or people within the MBTI blogosphere, etc., they all think that the 16 types or even the cognitive functions are static, and they are not. And none of them actually account for neuroplasticity, which is entirely ridiculous to me and egregious. Like, we've been talking about neuroplasticity for years. But the thing is that like while we have neuroplasticity and while we are super like adaptable in our environment, we are none so more adaptable than actually, being children. Children have the highest neuroplasticity, and we're able to see that when it comes to cognitive development, because cognitive development typically comes from a person's childhood. Cognitive focus starts being a thing basically in a post-adolescence, or just when adolescence starts, basically post-beginning adolescence, and then indefinitely for the rest of their lives, where cognitive focus can change on a dime. It can change, like, let's say you find out you're pregnant, or let's say you give birth, or let's say you get a new job, or let's say you get a new lover, basically, or you lose an arm, or like these types of events in your life, which are ultimately life-changing. Anytime your life can change, and sometimes there's big changes, sometimes there's small changes, but it's these changes in your life that truly represent how your brain uses neuroplasticity to adapt to those particular situations, and as a result, it is expressed directly in your octagram. That's how it works, okay? And one of the ways that this can actually be mapped, or how this actually works, is the concept known as soft locking. And that's another reason, Mr. Tony, that we haven't been able to go into detail about octagram at all, because we haven't had a chance to actually outline soft locking properly. And we finally did in the December 2022 episode of the Cutting Edge podcast available to the Journeyman members. We had to get that content out first because that lecture is a prerequisite to this lecture series. And folks, if you're watching this and you haven't had a chance to actually watch the soft locking lecture, get on that. What are you doing with your life? Go to the Cutting Edge section here in the members, in the Journeyman members section, and find the December 2022 episode and watch it, because you really need to know how soft locking works so that you can understand and maybe even predict exactly how a person's octagram is actually going to form based on the environmental factors that cause soft locking within a person's mind, which ends up developing or shaping what their octagram actually ends up becoming. Okay, that's a thing. So yeah, soft locking is the engine for octagram and nurtural development or shaping. Environment either enables or disables the expression of the ego, right? So it really comes down to whether or not your ego is expressing itself. Is it being enabled by the environment, or is it being disabled? Okay, that's the first question that someone would need to ask. If you cannot express your ego fully in your environment, the pressure will lead you to other sides of your mind. However, your psyche is always still trying to achieve its cognitive origin, even from a different side of the mind. That's another reason why we weren't able to get this lecture series out until we have finished covering cognitive origins, which we just finished in season 18, Cognitive Mechanics. Go watch those episodes as well. So you guys just have to understand, we will release content once we get all of the prerequisites out of the way, so we could talk about the next thing. And trust me, folks, all the like every week we're basically having new discoveries, in terms of how the science works, and then getting out in the field and testing it out, etc., and experimenting with it. And we have to make sure that we're doing our due diligence and presenting the content properly, or else we're just going to be jumping the gun. And we felt this when we were presenting temples, because we actually had to completely redo our temple content, which was really frustrating because we jumped the gun and we would decide that we're not doing it anymore. So that's why we had to get all these prerequisites out, like soft locking and cognitive origins within season 18, in order to be able to actually start presenting and teaching this content. Okay, so thank you all who have been patient and waiting for us to explain octagram and how it works. All right. And I guarantee you this stuff will blow you away, and you may even be able to gain some advantages or just some additional tools from which you could type other people, as a result of this content. So pay attention. It's very, very important. So there you go. So environment either enables or disables the expression of your ego. If you cannot express your ego fully in your environment, the pressure will lead you to another side of your mind. However, your psyche is always still trying to achieve its cognitive origin, even from a different side of the mind, which is extremely key. You guys got to remember that. So soft locking refines your ego. It can produce ego enablement, or it can expand it. Ego disablement, forcing expansion to the other side of the mind. So ego enablement expands your ego, whereas ego disablement forces expansion to other sides of your brain. And it's like, this is one of the reasons why you only use a small percentage of your brain at any given time, because the brain is like a fish tank and you're the shark. A shark can only be the size of the fish tank, basically, right? So that's basically what the brain is. It's a giant cage that has us inside of it, and we could only use or take up a certain amount of space within that particular cage or that room within a certain amount, at any given time. We can only take up a certain amount of space in our brain at any given time. That's all that is, right? And because of that, there's room for basically 4 people inside of our heads. And as we move through our head, it's almost as if we become a different person as we're exploring these different areas. That's literally how it works. That's how we are in our mind. And I'm sure from a neuroscience perspective, this is where Dario Nardi's work is ultimately going to lead him in the very, very near future. Okay. So soft locking, so you have ego enablement, ego disablement according to soft locking. Soft locking is the result of your life circumstances pushing you along the path to enlightenment. So again, how does soft locking work? It's like, for example, the rule of soft locking is that an optimistic function from a compatibility or synchronicity perspective can only go meet another optimistic function. So looking at an ENTJ and an ENTP relationship, extroverted sensing child does not link up to introverted sensing inferior like we previously supposed. It actually links up to the introverted sensing hero of the ISFJ subconscious within the ENTP, which means in order for SE child to be used by the ENTJ, it forces cognitive transition out of the ENTP's ego and into their subconscious, basically. And it does that for a temporary amount of time until the extroverted sensing child of the ENTJ is ultimately satisfied in that particular instance, right? And that is called soft locking because the ENTP is soft locked into their subconscious. That is an example of soft locking. And you just go through the entire functional stack and you'll see exactly where everyone within the context of their relationships and their friendships are being soft locked by each other. This can be a good thing, and it can also be a very bad thing. And this can lead to ego disablement, or it can lead to ego enablement. Either way, right? Which ends up going on beyond that. So how does that work? So whatever your archetype is, out of the 16 types, and whatever your origin is based on your archetype, divided by soft locking equals your octagram. That's literally what that means. So, for example, ESTJs. Okay, so now we're actually getting to the part where we're talking about ESTJs. ESTJs are seeking authority, also known as power, influence, and expertise to guide and educate others. This is as a result of feelings of powerlessness. Those feelings of powerlessness are derived from the life circumstances or environment that they've come through. So, for example, if an ESTJ feels powerless, they're going to try to get their cognitive origin. But is in the environment that they're in, is their ego being enabled to reach that, to gain additional authority and power? Is it? Or are they being disabled? So they have to go to the other side of their mind in order to use that. It's like, for example, you have an ESTJ, but like they have an ESFJ parent. And the ESFJ parent is soaking up all the room that any child would take. So that means their ESTJ child can't even use, like their ESTJ son can't even use extrovert intuition child. They have to go to a different side of their mind instead. They have to go into their shadow, for example, right? And that would suck. So then that begins the unconscious development within the ESTJ. So this is, where we get Lane from the Discord. He's an ESTJ, a very grumpy one at that, very UDUF, and we're going to be explaining why he's so grumpy in this episode. Right. So paradigm shifts such as moving out of your house, taking on a new lever, changing careers or jobs, having a child, or starting over in a new city often forces paradigm shifts in your psyche. Thus, this ends up changing your cognitive focus, right? So that too is paradigm shift is what drives cognitive focus. And then like whether or not your ego has been enabled or disabled, growing up, that drives your cognitive development, right? So this means that cognitive focus is more variable, whereas cognitive development is far more static when you compare the two. This is often why childhood determines cognitive development and adolescence determines your first cognitive focus. As you age and circumstances change, your focus changes along with it. Okay, so for example, this is why, throughout my upbringing, I was UDUF, and then I changed from UDUF to UDSF when I got away from my family, and it was awesome being UDSF, especially which we're going to be discussing in this particular lecture. But even beyond that, I'm now back into UDUF when I was before, and struggling with being UDUF. And most people say, well, this is Chase's dark years. And it's like, yeah, because I'm a lot darker than I used to be because I'm UDUF. And guess what? Lane has the same issue going on for him. He has the same issue. He is UDUF as well, so he suffers in the same way that I suffer. And we're going to be actually going in deep as to why that is the case. And sorry, Lane, I'm just using you as the example, but you're like the token ESTJ of the community right now, and everyone loves you and ultimately respects you and is just happy to have you around, including me, even though every now and then I'll flip you shit, but you flip me shit all the time, and it's just kind of like my ESFP superego mirroring you back to you, because hashtag taste of your own medicine, from an SE hero point of view. So yeah. Anyway, the 4 variants of the ESTJ. So let's actually go in deeper onto what the ESTJ actually looks like in terms of the variants. Remember, folks, remember, cognitive development is typically decided by childhood, and cognitive focus is first decided by adolescence and then changes based on paradigm shift. That's kind of how it works, okay? So if you're looking at a child who is still in childhood, naturally, because they're a child, their cognitive development is not going to be always the same thing, okay? It's not always going to be the same. So then, let's look at the 4 variants of the ESTJ. We have subconscious developed, subconscious focused, ESTJ, which is credulity plus initiative. Okay, so most people ask me, like, okay, hold the phone. Mr. C.S. Joseph, tell me, how the hell do you actually type someone's octagram? Great question. I'll tell you right now, because that's what these lectures, I could talk about that in these lectures. Well, guess what? Your cognitive development, how you type it, is you look at a person's shadow pole versus their aspiration pole. The shadow pole of the ESTJ is manifestation, and their aspiration pole is credulity. Are they more manifesting or are they more credulous? Okay, and that will determine what their cognitive development is. Which one of the poles are they closest to? And then in terms of cognitive focus, are they closer to their deadly sin or are they closer to their living virtue? Which one is it, right? Which one? Okay, so guess what? That's cognitive focus. Which one they're closest? Deadly sin, living virtue. Deadly sin, they are unconscious focused. Living virtue, they are subconscious focused, okay? That's how you determine a person's octagram. Pretty simple. There's a bunch of tools and techniques that you can utilize to determine from there, but that is the general principle as to how it works, okay? So let's examine SDSF, the atypical for ESTJ, which is credulity and initiative, also known as the bouncing ball, okay? So SDSF ESTJs have hyper subconscious development, so they are overly invested in their ego function. So they have big egos, apparently, which is not Lane. This is not Lane. If anyone were to tell me that Lane is an egomaniac, I would tell them they're out of their mind. He is not actually an egomaniac. He just wants to find out the freaking truth, okay? Yeah, I may grandstand every now and then, and yeah, he may come off like he's desecrating, as a result, but he's just trying to figure out what's actually happening. He's not an egomaniac. However, I do know that there are some egomaniac ESTJs out there, and those are kind of like the SDSF ones because they have a really big head, okay? And that's because they're overly invested in their ego functions, right? SDSF ESTJs are looking for pre-established paths that lead to authority, seeking recognized degrees, certifications, and esteemed positions through institutions are particularly attractive to SDSF ESTJs. These are the career politicians, folks. These are the career politicians, okay? These are the Justin Trudeaus, right? This is the new prime minister of the United Kingdom, right? Okay, these guys. Okay, these are the SDSF. This is Gavin Newsom. Okay, the governor of California. All right, these are the SDSF ESTJs. All right, so they feel secure when they are guaranteed authority through the test of time served. So these are the ESTJs that put way too much emphasis on time served. To the point, like, it's so funny to watch SDSF ESTJs as well in the context of sexual relationships, because from their perspective, it's like, well, if I just hang around this STP woman long enough, she'll realize that I'm the only one that sticks around for her, and then she'll just naturally choose me because I'm the one that she's most familiar with, which for some stupid reason that actually works on STP women. Oh, it's so disgusting and actually gross if you think about it, because it's so passionless and so machine-like. But, STPs, as much as they like to pretend that they're super strong, they're actually pussies. And, giving around, and having someone that is willing to put in time served makes them actually feel safe. Because, from their perspective, because they're not willing to put in the time served, someone who does put in the time served makes them look a lot stronger than they are. So therefore, they end up being slowly attracted to the person as they gain more familiarity with the STJ over time. It's so horrible, and I hate it, but it is what it is, Gross. So, yeah. So they feel secure when they are guaranteed authority through the test of time served. These ESTJs are the most likely to climb the corporate ladders, as well as political ladders based on guarantees. Credulity allows subconscious developed, subconscious-focused ESTJs to consume the knowledge and beliefs of their environment, achieving authority by being conduits of whatever the external authority deems valid. So subconscious developed, subconscious-focused ESTJs in a church, for example, often take rules the most serious, like they're the rule followers, as they achieve authority in relation to how well they enforce the rules given by the institution they represent. This also means that they have to go out of the way to follow rules, because from their perspective, the more I follow the rules, the more I get to enforce them. The more I follow the rules means that because I follow the rules, I'm going to make people follow the rules too, because I did my time served following rules that I didn't necessarily agree with or actually want to do. But I'm going to force everyone else to do it because that's what I did. And I wasn't strong enough to challenge the system. I just became the system. Great. Thank you, SDSF ESTJs. SDSF ESTJs get authority through being empowered by the institution they associate with. So that's ultimately where it is. It's just like, hey, I'm going to see this giant monolith of authority, and then I'm going to go represent that monolith authority so I get my cognitive origin of authority. That's all it is. It is the bouncing ball. It's like, it's the most immature way to do it. It's also the most, like, if you think about it, like there's a serious lack of intelligence behind being SDSF as an ESTJ. And I don't really mean lack of intelligence as much as I'm saying a lack of critical thinking. There's a lack of critical thinking there. So forgive me when I say lack of intelligence. I mean lack of critical thinking. Otherwise, I'd just be like insanely insulting, and that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to insult them. I'm just trying to like point out the fact that these people lack critical thinking. It's ridiculous. Moving on to the next one, SDUF ESTJ, which is credulity and sloth. And this is basically the ESTJ that consistently rests on their laurels. They're all about resting on laurels. Yay! The laurel resters. And honestly, like you'll notice, folks, that SDUF octograms of each of the 16 type variants end up becoming like the people who are least successful in life, whereas the UDSF types end up becoming the most successful in life. So that's kind of why they belong in a relationship with each other. So just throwing it out there from an octagram perspective. So let's look at those credulous, slothful SDUF ESTJs, the ones that rest on their laurels. Yippee. So SDUF ESTJs have a lifelong investment in their INFP side and are investing in developing their ISTP to increase their maturity. Okay, so these are the people who had a really good childhood where they were completely enabled by mommy and daddy and whoever else, maybe even their school, who knows, only for that entire support structure to be completely ripped out from under them by the time they hit adulthood. And then they have to figure out real quick that they've been spoiled their entire upbringing, okay? Because SD types are typically spoiled in their upbringing, right? And they've been consistently spoiled, okay? And then as a result of that spoilage, all of a sudden these people realize they're not being spoiled by life anymore. Whereas they had that little zone within their family, which they were getting spoiled, but they're no longer being spoiled. And as a result of not being spoiled anymore by any institution or by their family or by the church or whatever community they grew up in or what have you, they're not being spoiled anymore. And all of a sudden, they reach adulthood, and all of a sudden the real world is in their face, not spoiling them anymore. That is the SDUF experience. Congratulations, you played yourselves. Congratulations, parents, for literally harming your children by spoiling them. This is what happens. These are the spoiled children of the octograms, the SDUFs, and they have it oftentimes way harder because they have to figure out super quick that the real world is not going to spoil them like mommy and daddy did, okay? That's a big problem, okay? And sometimes neglect of a child can also lead to spoiling. For example, in the case of she was spoiled by her parents who basically neglected her because that means she had unlimited freedom with her NI inferior and still was able to become subconscious developed even though she was indirectly spoiled with endless freedom for her inferior, okay, even though they were actually neglecting her the entire time, which is a really sad story. Think about that. But anyway, these are the people who rest on their laurels, right? So anyway, SDUSF SDUF ESTJs aim to protect the achievements and positions of authority they have acquired. SDUF ESTJs often avoid challenges that would force them to grow. They also often prevent other people from going through challenges that would cause them to grow, lest the ESTJ have to grow too. These are the people that go out of their way to prevent other people's growth, because if they know if other people grow, that the ESTJ is going to have to compete, and they too are going to have to grow as well. These are the types of ESTJs that absolutely cannot suffer an upstart, and they will go out of the way to sabotage the upstart whatsoever. That way they don't have to work as hard. These people are the lazy ESTJs, as lazy as you can get, okay? Because they were spoiled so long, and they're trying so hard to recreate the childhood spoiling experience later in life. And they spend most of their time, if not all of their time, trying to do that, which is really frustrating if you think about it, okay? So SDUs, they aim to protect the achievements and positions of authority they have acquired. Oh, yes. ESTJs often avoid challenges that would bring them to grow. They are at risk of believing they have arrived because they obtained temporary authority. And career politicians, for example, face this risk daily, right? The thing is, though, is that sometimes those career politicians are very ambitious and they're able to keep their career, but these are the politicians who are trying to be career politicians, but they end up failing. So SDSF is more on the career politician side because they're able to consistently going, but these are the ESTJs that burn out. They burn out because they rest on their laurels. So they can't exactly be career politicians per se. While SDUF ESTJs can easily cultivate serenity in self and others, their biggest risk is selling their souls to an institution. This variant of the ESTJ has typically not learned how to empower themselves and is incredibly reliant on external sources of power to maintain their influence. These are the types that the elite wants you to be the most. Okay, so these are the ESTJs who take orders the easiest. They're the ones who join the military. They're the ones that would be happy to live life being told what to do, and then get the small rewards as a result of being told what to do. These are the ESTJs that will not be entrepreneurial. These are the ESTJs who will always at best become ultimately nothing more than middle management. What a horrible way to live life, right? Yeah, not exactly the best thing. I would not want to be an SDUF ESTJ. Of course, I wouldn't want to be ESTJ at all. But like I do not want it. You don't want to be that ESTJ that's resting on the laurels. And if you're watching this and you are that person, you might want to. Hopefully, this turns into a paradigm shift. So maybe you actually start focusing on building your unconscious or your subconscious a little bit more. You know, because it's kind of better to be SDSF than it is to be SDUF. That's for sure. And remember, like these, because they were spoiled, they end up being immature through subconscious development, right? But they didn't lean into that immaturity and go all out for happiness. They're trying to like, oh, crap, I've been immature this whole time. I've had my support structure taken out from under me, so I'm kind of forced to actually develop my own wisdom now. So that's why I'm unconscious focused. And it's all of a sudden like these people are entirely divested within the four sides of their mind, and they weren't able to make it through. It's still a weird form of imbalance, and it really absolutely sucks, and it sucks to be them. And then we have the UDSF ESTJ, also known as the Jeff Bezos ESTJ, basically, which is I will create authority by walking my own path. And this is manifestation plus initiative from an octagram perspective. So unconscious development leads ESTJs to be on the independent side of their mind. Why? Because they weren't spoiled. These are the children that were not spoiled in their upbringing. So if anyone wants to tell me that Jeff Bezos was spoiled, he was not, okay? If you think that, you're absolutely out of your mind. He actually worked hard and earned what he earned, okay? Because he's manifestation, and manifesting ESTJs are extremely independent. They've had to figure it out on their own. They didn't have a support structure growing up as a child. They weren't spoiled as a child. They have to figure it out, okay? So it leads ESTJs to be on the independent side of their mind, also known as the ISTP side, while working to experiment with philosophy on the INFP side. UDSF ESTJs realize that performance alone does not always lead to success. Sometimes you have to invest your principles and your wisdom beyond the faculties of performance and realize that there has to be more to success than just top performance. UDSF ESTJs rely on building up their own skills and performance to make their own vision come true. UDSF ESTJs lead with their desire and performance. They create goals and checkpoints for themselves rather than just relying on steps society tells them they should take. These are the ESTJs who probably will have nothing to do with degrees or college degrees, and it's just like, okay, yeah, this sucks. And just kind of go out on their own. They're going to make it happen. They're the go-getting ESTJs. So they often get lost when they only focus on manifesting their own introverted intuition desires, though, which is a problem. So they have the best success when they learn to help others manifest their desires. Through this process, UDSF ESTJs find their own path. So the thing is that UDSF, like in order to be successful, they have to take people along with them for the ride. It has to be an aspect where they realize their introverted sensing parent, when it starts developing, it has to share. It has to be willing to share that vision with others and take people along for the ride. And that's exactly what Jeff Bezos did when he started Amazon. He shared that vision of the everything store to other people, to other investors. They believed in his vision and they followed him. Had he been trying to bootstrap at and do it on his own, he would have absolutely failed. Right? And Amazon would not exist today. But it does because he actually took the wise position, and instead of focusing and developing everything that he has towards his NI trickster, he decided to actually use his SI parent, from the battleground of responsibility, to use his parent to responsibly share his any child vision with other people so that they could get behind him and ultimately support them. Okay? And this is how he realized, what can I do to manifest the desires of these people? Well, they want this in the store. Okay, well, they want that in the store. Okay, fine, fuck it. Let's just have the everything store so everyone gets their desires in there. It's kind of like Oprah. You get a car, she gets a car, everyone gets a car. Everyone gets the ability to sell on Amazon. It's any child. That's literally how it works, okay? These variants of ESTJs have a certain unstoppable quality to them, where their initiative is built around strong sense of purpose, making them difficult to deter or alter. And these are the incredible ESTJs. These are incredible. I mean, I have to get envious just thinking about what it is to be UDSF. I just do, because UDSF, literally, they have it the best. They absolutely have it the best, for sure. And then there is the UDUF ESTJ, which is manifestation sloth, also known as I am the path, okay? And this is where Lane is on the Discord server. Sorry, Lane, still got to pick on you. Love you, bro, even though I give you a lot of shit, but you give me a lot of shit too, so it's only fair. So anyway, unconscious developed, unconscious focused ESTJ are doubling down on ISTP's performance, which leads to a higher level of pride. Oh my God, yeah, Lane, his pride is just insanely out of control, just like, my vainglory is. So they end up teaching their performance to others because of the self-belief that their way is the only way. And these are the ESTJs who have the my way or the highway attitude. My way or the highway attitude. And, that's literally Lane's attitude all the time. He is UDUF. He just seriously comes off as my way or the highway. And oftentimes that ends up leading him to like an area of depression, because that can actually be, to a point where it's like, well, no one wants me, so I'm just going to sacrifice my expert intuition child to my demon. This is how UDUF people actually work. UDUF people in childhood are the people who never actually had anything given to their child function. Their child function was either not allowed to be a source for their nuclear family, or their child function was not allowed to be a consumer for their family, to the point where it's very likely that, Lane's father and mother, one of them is an ESFJ with an extroverted intuition child that was sucking up all the space within the nuclear family, and his any child had no room to act. So as a result, he has to rely on his introverted intuition trickster, and then thus the power of his demon, which is extroverted feeling demon, an ethical demon. So he has to sacrifice his extroverted intuition child because it's not even remotely useful in the context of his family or in his upbringing or in his childhood, because it's absolutely worthless. And his brain's like, well, we can't use our child anymore, so we have to sacrifice it to the demon in exchange for the demon's power so we can actually get anywhere in our life. This is the UDUF way. It's the sad way of the UDUF. It sucks, but it is how it is. Okay? So And this is why it ends up coming to this self-belief that their way is the only way, my way or the highway. It's where they are literally putting their introverted intuition trickster above everyone else. It's hilarious. Just like I put my introverted feeling trickster above everyone else. UDUF ESTJs store up paths and visions that they use on self and others without prioritizing action. They show others a path and encourage them to walk it, but will not successfully or necessarily walk it themselves. These are also the ESTJs who create rules and regulations for other people, but then decide, well, they don't apply to me. They just apply to those people, but they don't actually apply to me. And that's ENFJ demon talking, okay? So this includes making rules for others that they do not believe they have to follow or apply to themselves, funnily enough. UDUF ESTJs are the most likely to spur society's path to authority. Manifestation sloth leads to self-empowerment, where they siphon its power and repurpose it for their own manifestation and their own destiny. UDUF ESTJs believe that all power they will need already exists without them, and they just need to draw it from the environment they reside, extracting power from physical totems, totems of power, or even people in their life. They believe they can do anything so long as they have a power source to draw from. These are the power vampires. UDUF is all about authority and power vampirism. They will suck it up and use every last ounce of it, kind of like a virus consuming the land, basically. That is just the UDUF way, and it's so sad, and it's just kind of... And the thing is, though, is that's why oftentimes UDUF ESTJs are depressed and face depression, because it's like they have consumed all of the available power, and they have to move on to the next area. And just the fact that they have to go to the effort to move on to the next area, move on to the next amount of people, or move on to the next power source, they have to spend the energy, slothfully, which sucks because sloth doesn't want them to do that. They have to spend the energy going to look for another source of authority, another source of power, another power source until that's used up. Kind of like draining batteries. They're just constant battery drains. And the reason why is just because no one charged the battery of their expert intuition child in their childhood. And they had to, and because their child was completely and utterly destroyed and thus sacrificed to the demon, so that they can use the power of ENFJ superego, this is why they are the way they are. It's a really sad state of affairs. What's also funny about UDUF people? These typically are the firstborns. Typically the firstborns, okay? Whereas the golden child is the UDSF to a point. Or actually more like a SDSF for like the hyper spoiled. And then so SDUF people are like the baby of the family. The golden child is the SDSF, and the total black sheep of the family is the UDUF. And the UDUSF is basically, the one that everyone bets on. The one that isn't the golden child, but the one who actually just ends up figuring it out. They're like the middle child, basically, but they're the one who actually ends up being the most successful in the end, because it is written, the first will be last and the last will be first, and that applies in every aspect of psychological type as well as the octagram. Never forget it, okay? It's a big, big deal. So UDUF ESTJs believe that all power they need already exists, and it just does. It's just they just have to find it. So they spend more time and more effort on trying to find power sources with which they could draw power from, instead of actually working hard to become a source of power for themselves. It's like instead of developing that philosopher's stone that they could use, and make a better life for themselves, the secrets to success, the principle for success. They want to completely consume other people's secrets to success and other people's principles for success and everyone else's philosopher's stone, and then basically steal other people's philosopher's stones and then use those for their own success. That is the UDUF ESTJ way. Watch out. Watch out. That's how they are. That's how they are. And to a point, the extroverted feeling demon actually walks around believing that they are entitled, if not deserving, of other people's philosopher's stones that those people built. Be careful. Be careful around the UDUF ESTJ. And it kind of sucks because, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I am the path. They actually see themselves as the path. And it really, really sucks. It's very, very painful. Very painful. And I often feel bad for, everything that they've had to get through. They've been entirely disabled. They've been disabled in their childhood, and they are being disabled in their adulthood. And honestly, UDUF people, you guys just have to escape. Escape your bondage, escape the situation you're in so that you can have healing and hopefully actually turn yourself into a UDSF octagram and free yourself from the bullshit. You have to do it. So social engineering implications of the octagram. If cognitive origin never changes, regardless of development focus, then giving an ESTJ their origin through their preferred poles is the best way to reach out to an ESTJ. Those poles are manifestation and credulity. From a manifestation perspective, show ESTJs that they have the power to manifest authority within themselves, and that manifestation is empowered by purpose. The other half of origin access for extroverted thinking hero, plus the body temple influence of purpose. For credulity, show an ESTJ they can gain power by playing by the rules. Through credulity, they are the fastest at becoming experts in a given field of knowledge. Both the four sides dynamics and the octagram are ultimately dynamic, but the octagram is even more so because it deals exclusively with human nurture and not nature. The deeper implication of an octagram variant is to understand how the other temple origins are siphoned through the poles. For example, check out the Ego Hacking by Text Masterclass. So folks, the bottom line is that these represent the four different variants of the ESTJ. And like I said, folks, there's so many implications when it comes to how things happened in childhood, whether or not they were spoiled, whether or not they were enabled, whether or not they were disabled from a childhood perspective. And the same goes for any other area or phase of life that they have. It is even especially more hypersensitive from a female perspective because women have it worse in this regard because they have consistently changing life phases of life as a result of their hypergamous nature. Because, for example, one day they're more of a wife, and then the next day they're more of a mother, and then the next day they're old, and thus they have the matron, and then they still are trying to come up with a way to enjoy life from a lover perspective. And they have these different life phases: break phase, hoe phase or partier phase, epiphany phase, transition phase, security phase, development phase, post-development phase, and then the new security phase for the rest of their lives. These different phases, and because of female solipsism, which is innate female entitlement, when you apply it to the octagram, ends up making the octagram that much more sensitive, and they end up acting out even more. And imagine, a UDUF ESTJ woman, what is she going to do? She's going to see men as sources of power that she can extract power. And as soon as she is done extracting power from those men, she moves on from one man to another. An ESTJ woman who's resting on her laurels is one who just becomes entirely lazy. And this is the ESTJ woman that if you were to marry, all of a sudden she lets her body go and all sense of performance goes out of the window and frequency of sex goes down, quality of sex goes down. And she just lets her body go. Like, that's SDUF. UDSF ones, they could be, super successful. But the thing is that every time their life every time their life phase changes as a woman, basically, they'll just have a new priority that they have to conquer. And sometimes you can get whiplash. You can't really be used to them. They're going to be consistently changing. And then obviously SDSF ESTJs, they have this problem where they're basically going to be putting other things above you consistently while simultaneously expecting you to continue to spoil them and spoil them based on their aspirations, the strong independent woman motif, whereas the SDUF one wants you to enable them in their laziness, right? And that too is wrong. So again, how it affects the genders is also very relevant from an octagram perspective. So anyway, folks, hopefully you guys enjoyed this lecture. Thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.